people here, we're kind of like, we have big deer, so we're all just kind of happy about
I know
it.
we all hate you.
I could imagine that.
I kind of told Jared Mills this morning. I was like, "Yeah, you guys think like?" He's like, "I mean, it's Iowa." He's like, "What do you say? Deer in Iowa aren't that much different from deer in Pennsylvania." I'm like, "Right."
Weren't you?
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, it's almost food plot season, Jared, and Deer Grow is one of those products that has really changed the way that we plant food plots and the success we've seen from them.
No doubt. I've been, trying to plant food plots my entire, whitetail hunting career, which is a little shorter than yours. But the minute that I started, or that I realized that I could get Deer Grow back into some of these remote plots where I couldn't get lime or fertilizer, especially in the 50-pound bag, format. Mm-hmm. So everything was changed. I could get into these spots moving forward with a backpack sprayer, and that's since escalated to these 40 or 60 gallon sprayers, and we're doing upwards of 5 to 10 acre food plots just with Deer Grow and having phenomenal success.
Yeah, and I mean, with the price of fertilizer, lime, diesel, everything this year, I mean, what better way to get in there and grow a successful food plot at about a third of the cost? Check out Deer Grow at deergrow.com. And we're back.
Ew.
On our podcast, episode 106. Nick's not there.
It's okay.
He had run out.
106.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this, it's December 27th. So Merry Christmas 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. If I know my wife, my tree is already put away.
I'm going back out to Colorado.
Excuse me?
I tell you that?
I thought you were going to Curacao.
That's in January.
It's December 27th.
We're closed for the season, buddy.
When are you going to Colorado?
December 27th, I think.
Today, if you're listening to this.
Yeah.
So you're going to Colorado, then coming home, then going to Curacao.
A month later.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a month in between.
Oh, gotcha. Weeks in between, probably.
Couple weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going out.
What are you going to do?
Mom and Dad have some friends out there. We're going to just stay over New Year's.
Go skiing, snowboarding?
A little bit of skiing, a little bit of snowmobiling.
Ooh. Running over coyotes?
Quick trip. We run
quick trip.
Seasonal business, so we're kind of trying to,
this business ain't seasonal. We're here all year long.
The winter is our time to
party, play,
try to get some R&R.
Yeah, it's not peak time.
Plus, I've neglected my wife for about a month and a half during deer season. So
well, hopefully, if
she's earned some of my time, I suppose.
If you're about to leave and you're listening to this, Jared has returned from Kansas
with a giant buck.
We don't know. We don't know.
Probably not.
It's possible.
It's possible.
So yeah, today is the 8th of December. So at some point we'll get better with this, guys. Bear with us, everybody. I know a lot of people are like, man, I love this, but I wish it was was closer. We just, with the holidays and stuff, we're just trying to stack a few here. But we'll get better with that in 2023 and get kind of more on a real-time stance here. But yeah, so it is late season. We do have a good, it's late season, so I don't know. But we have a cold front snap coming through here. You're going to be in Kansas. I will probably hunt Kentucky. I'm kind of content with Ohio. I've seen a lot of really good bucks show back up. So as long as they keep surviving the next couple weeks.
What a weird time of year, man.
It's so dreary out too.
It's very dreary. The days are so short.
Not dreary.
Right. Pam. I'm with you in I share the feeling of let's put the season to bed.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm ready to I'm looking forward to projects and stuff.
Ooh, I am too.
I've got this big old field burn coming up and stuff. And, but I've got this Kansas tag burning a hole in my pocket, and I'm like, man, I'm not ready to be quite done with it.
I was very satisfied. Like when the kids killed their bucks, Emily killed a doe. I had already killed that Kansas buck. Literally the day Harlan killed his buck, I was like, damn, man, I just hang it up. It was like December 4th or 5th. Like I was like, but then I'm just like, well, I got other farms, and I have deer that I wanted to kill that are alive. And it's a weird thing. It's like, do you just hope that they make it?
The hard thing for me is if it was just up to me, I could hunt forever, probably. Mm-hmm. But I start feeling guilty that I'm
October and November are rough on relationships.
When the wife is like, you're still hunting, and I'm like, yeah, and I do. I start to feel like, I don't want to obviously take advantage, because she's, she's super generous to let me go whenever I want.
Those projects are going to take time too. Because I said that one time to my wife, we were talking about her obsession with running and my obsession with hunting. And I was like, well, yeah, but the difference is mine's like 2 or 3 months of the year. Yours is like all year. And she's like, oh, food plots, cameras, blinds, tree stands.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, okay.
Margie said something to me last night. She's like, you are going to miss like a lot of family stuff over this week that you're going. I was like, oh, am I?
I remember. So coincidentally, I was in Kansas. I think it was the 19th to the 22nd was when I killed white whale. And I believe I killed him on the 20th or 21st that evening. And Kev and Cassie and Vicky were having their Christmas party. So I went all covered.
They're like, don't you have a family?
I was in full camo, covered in blood, and just sitting there drinking beer as the kids were opening presents. And I was like, yeah, I got a booner out there. Yeah. Pretty awesome.
Pretty good feeling.
Yeah. So late season's cool. I first of all, I love just afternoon hunts. Pretty simple, clean. Get in, clean, hunt the afternoon, evening, out. That's it. No mornings, none of that. Just doesn't work out. And they're back on bed food. So if you got a good buck on camera, odds of getting on them and killing them.
I don't know if we're quite there. Like,
we haven't had enough cold weather.
Right. So, and I think they're still cleaning up some of these last does.
We've talked about that. Yeah, if you're listening to this now, it's probably past the cleanup of does. If you're in the South, I mean, it could be just getting good. But like in the North and Midwest, we just haven't had a cold enough snap to force them to want to eat. Like I think they're just lazy right now. It's 50 degrees out.
Yeah, so likely what will happen is, I mean, I've got a short stay and yeah, we're just gonna, I don't know.
4 days.
I got 4 days to like try to piece together some intel and we'll see.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is. So we are going to continue. I think we talked about it last week. We're going to continue on our Iowa streak today. We've got Warren Holder from Raised Hunting coming on. And so we're going to talk a little bit, continue to talk about Iowa being this like outcast in the deer management community of doing it right and very restrictive.
A beacon
of light, like the Christmas
in a dark,
star,
dark world,
like the Christmas star, yeah, of crossbows and corn pals, and then and just kind of see what we're continuing to develop in a discussion there about where can things change, and do we have the data to even understand if things should change or are they fine? We don't know, because most of the time the data is not out there publicly for us to understand. So we're gonna bring on Warren Holder.
Get him on.
Warren from Iowa, thank you for gracing us with your presence.
Thanks for having me here.
It's we kind of been on an Iowa streak here. Last week we would have Jared Mills on, and so and I think it's because the more Jared and I hunt our states as well as even some of these other ones, the more
Jared.
Yeah, this Jared. The more we continue to realize that Iowa seems to be the whitetail mecca.
You're just realizing that now?
Well, I mean,
that's what I was wondering.
No, we know.
I think Kansas is still a great place to hunt, but it slowly, because of a little bit more liberal in terms of how they're running things down there, I think it's declining in terms of quality or numbers of good quality deer, and Iowa's kind of holding the fort down with about as strict as regulations for non-residents as you're going to get. So
what do you guys think of Ohio? Because from what I've seen, it seems like Ohio, they're killing some giant deer every year, like huge deer.
So Jared and I both hunt Ohio, different parts of the state. I do think that with one regulation change, Ohio could be as good as Iowa, and that would be the baiting regulation. I think if they removed baiting as a legal method, Iowa and Ohio would be about on the same playing field for quality of bucks.
Really?
I mean, I don't know.
What do you think?
I don't think it would ever be as good.
You don't?
Because of the parcel size thing.
I mean,
that's the main driver, I think. But yeah, definitely the baiting is what's keeping
I bet
it from
they're
being
close.
Well, it's a complicated or my main farm is in Ohio. That's where I spend most of my time. And Jeremy's got a farm there as well as of recently. And it is like from talking to my taxidermist, who's becoming a pretty good buddy of mine. I mean, he sees a lot of big deer from across a giant deer, and you know, it's his opinion, and I believe it. I mean, I've seen some of the deer in his shop and stuff that like more people are willing to pass on deer than ever before. I think that's a product of knowledge of the deer herd from probably cell cams, trail cameras in general. So that's good. That's encouraging. But at the same time, I think people more than ever are like willing to use any and every tool at their disposal to kill deer. And 99% of deer, hunters rather, are not passing on, you know, deer that we'd like to pass on to get them over 4 years old.
Yeah.
How big is your Ohio farm?
Almost 1,000 acres.
In a given year, what is your, like, typically what's your top end buck, and then what's your like average deer? So like, let's just say, do you usually have, 10, 150 type deer on there, or is it,
No.
3?
Usually like throughout the entire season, and it fluctuates because we have more deer like in September and October than we do in November, December.
Okay.
I'm going to say we might have one or two 5-year-old bucks, and we might have 2 or 3 additional 4-year-olds. And it seems like it's getting worse. Yeah.
And how big are they usually? Like just a ballpark.
Like we had a 4-year-old killed the other day on the neighbors. That's still open. Mid-50s.
Mid-50s.
And he was solid.
Deer.
He was like a 11, 12 point.
Is that 1,000 acres contiguous?
No.
No.
Nope.
It's all split up.
It's one big. It's two chunks basically.
Okay.
And there's overlap. Like it's basically a big L that's like 600-ish, and then there's 2 or 3 landowners in between that hunt, and then we have another block down here that's like 300.
So they're just not making it then. The deer are just getting killed.
Yep.
It's very Iowa-like in the fragmentation style, I would say. Because like, you've got some bigger woodlots, but you've also got a lot of 5 and 10 acre woodlots with just giant field and ag around.
For sure. It's old cattle ground.
Yep. And so, that's what I think makes some of these deer vulnerable. He's got some giant deer in the area, but it also makes them very vulnerable because, that buck's living in a 5 acre or 10 acre patch, and he may be moving to multiple ones, every other day, but when he comes out of one, he's pretty visible.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I'd tell you like 1,000 acres here, I would tell you on 1,000 acres here, you're probably, if you didn't have at least 2 booners, I would be almost shocked.
Yeah.
And you're going to have probably like 1,000 acres. You should have probably at least a dozen or more deer that are 150 plus.
Yeah.
We have one farm that's like about 400 acres, and I can think of on that farm, and that one though it's to Jeremy's point, it's quite a bit of timber, and we're like the home. So a lot of those deer will leave us, but they all come back to us. That's so when they're traveling outside of their core area, it's at night. They're going to feed so unless somebody's able to catch them, right on their way out in the morning or in the afternoon, they're pretty safe for the most part. And on that farm in particular, I know there's at least 3 or 4 deer. I think we have 3 on there that are 7, and that's not necessarily normal though. That's pretty good. And we actually have a pretty big age gap in there now. Used to, I don't know what's happened really on that farm, but at one point it was unbelievable. Like we had 3 or 4 deer on just that piece alone that were booners, and like big booners.
Yeah. Well, see, I think the big booners. The two things that I think that has the most to do with is parcel size and hunter numbers. So in Ohio, we have smaller tracts of land, generally speaking, than Iowa or some other Midwestern states, and we also have more hunters per acre. And so they just don't get that old, and couple that with the fact that, we beat this into the ground on the last podcast, but couple that with the ability to hunt during the rut with a rifle over a corn pile with a cell camera, they just get killed. Like, that's what I'm saying. So at this point, at least in our little area of Ohio, and between me and some other landowners, I've got knowledge of most deer that get killed within a couple mile square radius. Like we've got some ground covered as far as who we know and stuff. And I think we're looking at like 1 5-year-old per 1,000 acres.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah, that's
basically
pretty
where
tough.
we're
But,
at.
because that's the thing that's weird about here, though, too, is, everybody thinks that all of our deer get super mature, which compared to a lot of places they do. But at the same time, our genetics are so superior that we'll have, it's not uncommon to have a 3-year-old or a few of them that are like 150, 160. Even occasionally, we'll have
Dude, we do
ridiculous
too.
3-year-olds.
We have a lot of 150-inch 3-year-olds. It's not uncommon to see that. It's
Well, that's why I'm
very
saying-
uncommon to see them alive in December.
Well, and that's why I'm saying it. I think that, you could, Ohio could rival an Iowa because the deer potential is there if you got them to 5.
Here's the other number that is mind blowing. So if I say, this is just, we're guessing here, but 1 5-year-old per 1,000 acres, I'll bet on every 1,000 acres there's 20 guys hunting.
You think so? I was going to say 10.
No, I mean, dude,
20?
yeah. Well,
Oof.
because think about the average parcel size is much, it's
40s,
not 1,000 acres.
40s and
40,
80s.
And on every 40, there's
2 guys.
2 guys.
Yep.
So that's more than 20. Right?
No, it's 10.
Yeah, that would make it tough.
Right?
40, I don't know.
10,
I
20.
can only
Yeah.
count by nines.
Yeah, it'd be
it's about
20.
20.
Mm-hmm.
Is it exactly 20? If so, pretty
No.
good. Okay. So yeah, 20 guys on every 1,000 acres hunting 1 5-year-old.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And most of them aren't hunting 5-year-olds. 99% of guys are looking for
3-year-old.
3 and 4-year-old bucks.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, then any deer that probably makes it to 5 in that situation is probably a pretty smart deer.
Yeah.
And they are out there. And
For
they
sure.
do run across us. I mean, this is one of the things that come with the territory of hunting the fragmented landscape. Is remember that giant 6, 7-year-old buck I showed you the other day?
Mhm.
He ran across us after he got shot at.
Did he?
He ran across at Ramsey Field. And from time to time, like it's like every year there will be one giant that at some point in the season is in the vicinity. And they're big, old, 175, 180-inch framed,
Big deer.
big deer. And they just, I don't know, they get killed. I mean, sooner than later in some cases, but.
Well, and I think that's where it gets really interesting when you start to look at the regulations, the seasons, the bag limits. Obviously, a huge factor is like open over-the-counter tag in Ohio, very restricted non-resident opportunities in Iowa. Similar gun seasons in length. In fact, Iowa probably has a little longer gun season than Ohio does, but I would assume what I don't know is how many Ohio hunters residents there are versus Iowa hunter residents there are. You know what your Ohio or your Iowa numbers are, Warren?
No, I don't, but I know our population, I think, is less than your guys's, so it's probably lower still.
I would assume so, because I think we looked, I want to say it was 500 and something for Ohio for hunters. Does that sound right? Licensed hunters?
I don't know.
Well, and how big's the state? Ohio and Iowa are probably fairly comparable in size, I would think.
That's what I'm saying. Is it is a very I wouldn't say apples to apples, but pretty damn close. All right, so this is in 2018, so crappy data, but 400,000 Ohio hunters.
I think Ohio's like about 2/3 the size of Iowa geographically, be my guess.
So let's say about 400,000 Ohio hunters as compared to Iowa, 223. So about double. So about double the hunters in Iowa or in Ohio than Iowa.
Yep.
I mean, there's your killer.
With let's say 2/3 the land mass, or 3/4 at the most.
In terms of deer density, or like deer land and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
3/4.
Well, if you want to call it usable deer habitat, it's probably even less.
Yeah. So yeah, double the guys and half the habitat.
Yeah.
Well, even if you just said they were the exact same, cut the number of hunters in half, and that's a lot of deer, that make it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've been out like Kansas is our closest probably experience to Iowa. So we know what it's like to, throw cameras up on a 160-acre release and have a booner and, have a couple 5-year-olds and run around and older. Jeremy's killed a couple 6, 7, 8-year-old deer out there. So it's like cool. The age structure is there. Like genetic seems to be the very last conversation like on the list.
Well, it's just because we got to get them old.
You just got to get them old. Even here in Pennsylvania, like we've got, plenty of decent genetic deer. They just don't ever get above 2 or 3 years old. Very rarely.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Have you guys hunted Iowa yet?
No.
Or have you not hunted Iowa?
Not yet.
Really?
We've got 5 points. We get 5 points?
We got our 4th this year, I think.
Yes, we get our 5th next year.
So you guys could possibly draw. It depends on the
I think
on the zone.
I think we're hoping to draw. We're going zone 5, I believe, is the plan.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to draw in 2024.
4.
So not next year.
So we'll get a point next year and then we'll draw.
Yeah, because 5 used to be 4 points, and now it's taken 5 points.
Yeah.
By
At
the
least
time
what
we
I've heard
get,
from the non-residents so far.
by the time we get there, it'll be 6 points.
12.
So it'll be another year.
Yeah.
Damn inflation.
Yeah. Once in a lifetime. Yeah,
Thanks,
but I mean,
Biden.
so there is the kind of, devil in the details of like a state like Iowa, even though you guys are able as residents to harvest multiple bucks if you want to, you've got half the hunters. You've got, a fairly short gun season, and multiple of them, but short gun season. And yeah, I mean, you've got just good deer habitat and food.
And what's your guys' laws for non-residents in Ohio?
Wide open.
Okay, so that's going to add a whole bunch of hunters too.
Yeah, I think it's like, I think my license cost me like $190 or $200.
They increased the cost recently, but
yeah, it's like $200 for an over-the-counter tag.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Iowa non-residents like $650 or $700, something like that.
Yeah, plus all the points you've bought, leading up to it.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
They are cheap, isn't it? Like $10 a year.
25 maybe.
Yeah,
per point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is interesting when you get into that. What I think is still kind of, I wouldn't say amazing because there's definitely some flaws in the states, but like look at a state like Illinois that is over the counter, $2 state. And I would say very heavily hunted, probably over hunted in many cases. And they're still producing giant bucks in Illinois, maybe not as frequently as they used to, but I mean, they still kill a lot of giants out of there. And
I'd be really curious to see in Iowa, just overall from when we moved here, like 10 years ago to now, I feel as though like we still, like Iowa as a whole still kills a lot of really, really big deer. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it used to be like there was a couple 230, 240, like these ridiculous deer, that were killed every year. And I'd say like the last few years, there was still like maybe 1 or 2 that were in that, 240, 250 range of something that's just stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but it seems to starting to taper off some. Like it's hard, to even talk about it when you're saying, oh, well, we're killing all these 200-inch deer, but they're not 230.
Yeah.
I guess my point is that like the ridiculous giants, it does not seem like we're killing as many anymore as we used to. The Iowa Deer Classic is a great place to go and see really what was killed in the year because everything kind of comes full circle at the Deer Classic. But it does seem as though that like people are still killing really, really big deer, but those absolute freaks, it doesn't seem like we're killing as many as we used to.
I wonder if you're just killing them at 4. They're just not making it to that fully 5 or 6 year old maturity. Because one thing Jared Mills was saying is that even though we as non-residents can't draw but once every 5 or 6 years, there's obviously loopholes with non-resident doe tags and party hunting. And then also, some of these guys, non-residents, are still just buying Iowa land, and whether they're rotating guys in and, or family members or whatever, they're occupying land that maybe at one time was very open to permission base or something. And now all of a sudden it's, being held down by out-of-staters who, no offense, because we are out-of-staters, we're not probably going to be passing 180-inch 4-year-olds. But maybe guys in Iowa who live there all the time, who see what's around, who know what they're hunting, are able and capable of passing that 180 to know that he's the potential 200 at 5.
Well, so here's an interesting statistic then for you guys. So for the past 10 years that we've lived here, I can't tell you for a fact that I have even seen a 200-inch deer yet. I think that there's been one that I would say I'm 95% confident that he was 200. He was probably I'm guessing he was probably 210. I have one of his sheds from 2 years before that was a 76-inch antler, and then he put on quite a bit.
Wow.
But my point is, so out of 10 years, I can't tell you for sure that I haven't had any of these that's like obviously a 200-inch deer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it seems like most of the stuff that we hunt, we'll get deer that hit pretty consistently hit the 170 mark, and then we'll get the occasional 180. But it seems like for us in the places that we hunt, breaking over the 190 to 200 mark is really, really difficult. But then you'll go over to some of these other little pockets, and they will have like a 225 every other year. It's like, I don't know, it's like there's something in the dirt, I swear.
That's crazy.
Like those different little regional pockets where it's just the size, like their threshold is different. The only thing that I feel as though it could be consistent so far is the number of deer. Seems like the more and more deer we get, the quality starts going down.
Yeah, it suppresses from like a social stress side or something.
I think once you get to that that point, that genetics does have a factor.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about a complete outlier to the bell curve when you're looking at a 180 plus.
Right. And like score is just, a measurement of all the tines, and tines and configuration is determined ultimately by genetics, So like on a general scale, like from state to state, or, talking about these 4 or 5 year old deer, is probably not as relevant of a conversation. But if you could get to states or like within subcultures of like, let's say Iowa, where, these deer are all, or for the most part, reaching peak maturity, 5, 6, 7 years old. At that point, it seems like you'd be able to see those like genetic, freaks versus, deficiencies a little better.
Oh, I would tell you most of the time, in my opinion, there is certain deer that they're going to do it. Like it's very rarely that you have a 3-year-old that you're looking at like, man, that deer is going to be a superstar, and he doesn't, make a 20, 30 inch jump.
Yeah.
Now, occasionally you'll get one that we have duds just like anywhere else, that they're 130-inch deer or whatever their entire life, and they just never grow. But for the most part, if you get a 3-year-old, that's like a really good solid buck, and he's got maybe a kicker here or something, it's not very often that one stalls out. Like you usually
he's
know.
Keep moving.
But they're already a genetic outlier even at that age.
Sure.
Compared to all the other 3-year-olds, they're 15, 20 inches bigger than anything else. But yeah, the score part, like there's a lot of deer that I've seen that, in my opinion, are way bigger than other deer, because that other deer had 26 points, but this one was, 180-inch deer with mass. Probably the most insane deer I've ever seen was this kid killed a deer last year that was a straight 8 that was 185 or 186, and as a straight 8 point. And this was not just like an Iowa deer. This thing was a total freak. The beams were like 27, the G2s were like 14. I mean, it was just the most unbelievable deer I've ever seen in my life.
Wow.
And the year before, it was a straight 10, just a complete, clean, typical 10, not a sticker on it. I think it had to have been close to 200, because his G4s were still freaking 9. I mean, the deer was unbelievable. Huge.
And I mean,
so
this
that deer, in my opinion, is way bigger than 200.
Well, and that's the thing, is those deer exist. Like I remember, and again, we're talking about those super outliers, and you got to remember, there's also the super outliers on the other side of the bell curve, which is like a giant 6-year-old 4-point piece of shit. I mean, they exist on that side just as frequently as they exist on the bigger side. But I remember Winky telling me the story of him chasing a 230 that was a 3-year-old. And it ended up getting killed, but I mean, he was like, he's like, it's just a freak of nature. 230 inches is a 3-year-old, and it's just.
How did they confirm that? Did they know him, or did they look at?
They knew him. Yeah, they at least had pretty good pictures of him as what they believed was a 2-year-old. Now, could he have been 3 and then 4? Possibly. But I would say he was pretty confident that it was a 3-year-old. And, it wasn't just, it had a big frame, but he just had kickers and stickers and junk all over the place. And if you look at that deer on the spectrum, that's possibly a 1 in 4 million deer type of thing. I mean, it just,
God, yeah.
It just isn't going to, again, take out the penned versions of these deer, from a free ranging standpoint. They don't make them like that. Like, it is such a far outlier. It's insane. Even as a 5 or 6-year-old, a deer to hit 230 is a 1 in a million plus deer. So as a 3-year-old, 2 years before maturity, And I'm not talking like, I don't know. You guys remember that buck that was killed in Tennessee a few years ago? Looked like, just like.
That's exactly one of the ones I was thinking of.
Well, and that deer almost looks unnatural. Like, I remember guys joking, saying like the kid like shot it with bird shot and velvet to like damage the antlers, and then it just like threw, stuff. Because that's what it looks like, right? I mean, it looks like a mainframe deer with just, like a rat's nest. And I forget, that deer scored like 230s or something. And maybe like
not a super impressive looking deer.
No, I mean, could that
kind of makes you mad at the system? Like when you see it, you're like, really?
Yeah.
That thing scored 230.
And could that deer have end up being, I don't know, a clean 10 the next year? Like maybe it did damage something in velvet and it just threw it all off. I don't know. Like it's different than those deer that have like this giant from Kansas that has like mega stickers and stuff everywhere. Like that deer has just been forming into a monster. But you get these just like freak throws that are kind of, I don't know. People are skeptical of them.
Well, dude, that crumplehorn buck was
80s,
pushing 80 probably.
Yeah.
And I think he was 5.
Yeah.
And we got pictures of him the year before, and I just kind of was like, there's a 4-year-old. Yeah, he's got a cool drop tine. And he was like, I bet he won 125.
Wow. Crazy.
You remember?
Yeah.
I showed you both this. But
yeah, I mean, it's just normal frame.
It was crazy. Yeah. I mean, he threw another really big drop tine. Mm-hmm. So he had two, he had like a 12-inch and like a 8-inch drop tine. And his main beams come around and swept
dove down
like a devil buck.
Yeah.
And he was just enormous, like through this
huge
crazy
mass.
frame, like from 4 to 5 would be my best guess. I don't think he was any older.
Hey, threw 50 inches.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like, but I would shoot that 8 over that Tennessee deer any day of the week.
100%.
That deer looks to me like he's like a 140-inch deer, that you just threw a whole bunch of stuff on.
Sure.
Not to discredit the deer, but that's where the scoring system, I think, has problems. It doesn't give those deer credit that for the mass through the tines and everything else. But
it is what it is. Yeah, there's gonna be exceptions.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's where, like, when you think about these states, and I don't, if you go by, let's say, Boone and Crockett records, right? It's that data is only as good as the people submitting it. It's not like every Boone and Crockett automatically appears in that record book. I wish it did, because man, can you imagine having that database and knowing, like, in a almost real time, like, man, this is where people are killing booners, period. Like, these are the counties. We're reliant on somebody actually sending in that deer and submitting that deer and all this stuff.
The problem is, though, dude, it's probably ever changing. Like, it's a constant moving target of people, chasing where that information is, and so they pop up somewhere else because somewhere it gets neglected. And
I mean, they just,
like Canada, like, we got cut off from Canada. There's probably some freaking giants up there right now.
Sure. Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, there's also guys in Iowa who I would assume none of us have ever heard of, and who have multiple 200 inchers sitting in their barn.
Oh yeah, there is. Wasn't Pike County like?
Yeah, there you go.
The first place that was huge deer everywhere.
And now people will tell you that most of the 5-year-olds they see are 140 or under.
Yeah. See, I wonder what causes that. That to me is crazy. Why it would transition like that.
In that case, it sounded
that's a conspiracy.
It sounded like outfitting potentially had made a dramatic impact. Like, a lot of outfitters came in, out of state people came in, they started shooting those. They were high grading the population.
Yeah. Well, how could pressure possibly have that effect, though?
Well,
that is weird.
It's no different than timber, right? So let's say I've got a huge stand of oaks and whatever, tulip poplars, right? I go in there, I cut out all the oaks. 10 years from now, there are no oaks. It's just all tulip poplars, right? I high graded the stand of timber. So it's the same value.
But you're not
with
just
deer.
cutting out the oaks, you're cutting out, well, maybe.
See, that's where, so like when we would do camera surveys for year to year on these properties, we would find, all of a sudden you would see like the standard growth. It'd be like, okay, here's your 1-year-olds, your 2s, your 3s, your 4s, and then 5s and 6s would be on the same plane as 4s. Well, it's not because they didn't grow. It's because they were killing all their good quality bucks at 4 and not letting them get to 5 to see that continual upswing in antler score. And so I think what happened in some of these places, like a Pike County, is all of a sudden a lot of pressure started happening, and all these good bucks probably started getting killed at 3 and 4. Thus, when you got to 4, it flatlined. Your scores flatlined at the top. So instead of seeing those 160 pluses, now you're just seeing 140s across the board. Because anything that made it from 4 to 5 was probably a inferior genetic deer. It was a crappier deer that got passed because they killed a bigger 3-year-old or 4-year-old. You high grade
makes sense.
Yep. And I mean, you see that you not only see that on a regional level, like Pike County, you see that on a property level. There's plenty of properties when I privately consulted that guys would say, yeah, I don't know. Like, we see mature deer, but they're just not big. And then I would go back in their harvest data and clearly see they're shooting a lot of 130s, 140s, but they're deer that field dressed at 125, right? They were killing 3-year-olds basically that were in that prime 130-ish class antler. And then those deer could have been 160s had they let them live 2 more years. Instead, they would pass the 124-year-olds and the 125 5-year-olds. And so those shittier deer were the ones only getting older. And it's been a proven thing. This is one of the reasons that even though antler point restrictions have helped in a state like Pennsylvania, a lot of people, if they look at the data, should be against antler restrictions because it puts the best quality 1-year-olds the most vulnerable, right? I mean, if I have a 3-point restriction, I protect all my spikes and 4 points. I kill anything that's 6 points and bigger.
Up where my Uncle Dale hunts in
Meadville?
Meadville, it's recently... Every year, he gets just a giant 6 or 7 point, and they're different deer every year. And he's like, these are the only ones that seem to get big and mature anymore. He's like, I'll have, a nice 2 or 3-year-old, and that's, they don't get a whole lot older up there because of the pressure.
Yep.
But pretty consistently the past couple of years, he's had some, 4, maybe 5-year-old, 6, 7 points that are barely legal. Like they'll throw
I'll throw data at you. There was a study in Mississippi probably, 10 years ago. And what they did is they never had antler point restrictions. So they said, it was on like a public land piece, we're going to make it 4 points or better. So basically we're going to protect all our 1, 2, and 3 points. Anything 4 points and better, you can shoot. And I think it was in the course of 3 years, they saw over a 10-inch decrease in antler size for any buck that was 4 or 5 years old. Because, in theory, all of the good 1-year-old bucks were getting shot. They were vulnerable. All the inferior ones were left behind to get older. And so you were essentially changing that local herd dynamic to make the inferior quality deer get older and shoot your superior quality deer.
So do you think, though, in a place like that you're affecting the genetics, though, or you're just all the deer that are genetically superior aren't getting a chance to make it to the age they need to? Yeah,
so you're not necessarily like manipulating the genetics as much as you are removing the superior genetic deer and allowing the inferiors to go through.
I'm pretty sure that's the definition of genetic modification.
Because genetic modification would mean like literally
you're not taking one DNA and mixing it.
Well, or from that point forward, you never produced good quality 1-year-olds. You still will because the doe contributes 50% of the genes.
What's the word? Selective
harvest.
Selective. Yeah.
Harvest.
But ultimately, yes, in the long term, you're removing
the better
genetically
quality, superior. Mm-hmm. Allowing inferiors to get older. Yeah. Over time, yes, you could affect the herd genetics in that area. But in the short term, it's not. You're just removing the best ones and letting the worst ones get older. If you kept doing that, just like in a timber stand, you eventually would have shit left over.
I think, though, that too would be assuming, though, that you're killing all of them.
Correct.
That there's none of the superior genetically deer that are making it, slipping it through the cracks and manage to breed it all.
Yeah. Well, I think you shift your bell curve though. So like if your let's say your average 1-year-old scored, 60 inches, right? And all of a sudden you make those the most vulnerable and you protect the other ones. Eventually, now your average 1-year-old scores 35 inches. So you've shifted the bell curve.
Yeah, I would say though, from what I've seen, I would be really nervous about shooting any deer, like saying that I'm going to get rid of this deer, unless he's at least 4. Because I've seen some deer that are 3 and go to 4 that really surprised me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I was like, this deer's going to be a total piece of crap. And then he freaking does 30 some inches. And I was like, oh, that would have been a big
Well, let's
mistake.
talk about
the
it.
same could be said about you, Warren. You kind of came out of nowhere with your shoulders.
Yeah.
He's just a scrawny
those are
guy.
years
Where did
ago.
those traps come from? It wasn't until 22 years old.
Yeah. Lots of milk and deer meat.
Yeah, whole milk. I
Yeah.
hope.
Well, I mean, talk about that for a second, because I think the terms like call buck and management buck get thrown around a lot, right? And
dude.
on the social media side, it's because you shot a buck mainly because you just wanted to shoot a buck, and the first thing you say is, well, he's not as big as I'd like, or he's not as big as my other ones, but it's a good management buck or whatever. And I hate it, dude. Hate it with a passion. Like, why do you got to say that stuff? And most of the time
first thing.
it's like a 3-year-old
The very
8-point.
first thing. The thing I would talk about even before that is how many of those deer do you think people are actually accurately aging, right?
That's it.
So they
Incorrect.
say that,
Yeah.
this deer is 5 years old or whatever, and he's
Yeah.
a crap buck. Well, from my experience so far, do you guys send your guys' teeth in?
Yes, I do.
Do you think that it's accurate, Jeremy?
Not as good as people think. I think it's
So what do you-
okay.
Have you gotten
What do you
some
think the
back?
variance
Yeah.
is?
Which ones did you do?
I did my Kansas buck recently.
The one you just shot?
Yep.
And they got it back to you already?
Yep. And I do not think it was accurate.
What'd they say?
4.
Really?
Yeah, and for sure was over 7.
Which other ones did you send in?
White whale,
What did it say?
8.5,
How did you think it was?
7 or 8. Yep.
Just those two?
And I sent a doe from Missouri in that had like no teeth, and that came back as 15.
Long time ago you did that.
Yep.
Interesting.
Who did you send it to?
Deer Lab, or I'm sorry,
Deer Lab.
Deer Age, deerage.com.
Deer age?
Yeah.
Did you have any history with your Kansas deer?
No,
None.
no, but I could
No?
tell at least
First day we saw it.
Yeah, I could tell.
I had about 30 seconds of history
Yeah,
with
he
this
jumped the fence, and I said, "Yeah, he's dead." Seriously though, no, but I could tell enough from the teeth wear on it that it was way older than 4. In fact, when I
Well,
looked
but
at it,
the-
I figured it was 7 or 8.
But the tooth wear is understandably less accurate than the cementum annuli
Yep.
because of their diets, right? What they could be
Yeah, so
eating.
tooth wear and replacement or replacement wear is much less accurate after 2 years of age than cementum annuli. The problem with cementum annuli is the deposits that you see annually usually occur because of a stressful event. Typically for deer, it's winter. In places that you might have not as severe winters or milder winters, those deposits aren't as well seen. So like, for instance, in Mississippi and Alabama, it's not nearly as accurate as it would be in Michigan or Wisconsin because they just don't have those severe stress events for wintertime like those northern states do. So the deposit line is much harder to see if it even exists at all. So if you got to pick one of them, right? Cementum annuli is definitely the more
Higher degree
accurate
of
way.
accuracy.
Yeah, but you're still getting a pretty big variance there after 3 years of age, especially.
What do you think is the degree of accuracy on a cementum annuli?
They've done research. I think it's like 65%.
As opposed to just looking at the jawbones, probably like what, 35% accuracy.
Tooth replacement and wear after 2.5 is like 40%.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, they've given, it was a cool study. They gave known age deer jawbones to biologists and said, hey, age this jawbone.
Right.
And it was like, 3, 4, and 5 years of age was like 35 or 40% accurate with like professional biologist aging, not just like the average guy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's super inaccurate.
Your deer was weird too.
But that was where? That's not cementum annuli, right?
Correct. So the cementum annuli, pulling those front incisors and sending them off. Matson's lab does it. That's a really big popular place. Like I said, Deer Age does it as well. Heather's really good over there too. But you get a really cool report back. You usually get a picture back that shows the deposit lines that they pick. And like I said, I mean, I've had deer that I think are very accurate. I've had other deer like this last one that and it could have been because of the sample I sent in. Like if you don't break those roots off just right and you submit a poor sample, it's garbage in, garbage out type of thing.
So I'd be really, really curious on that because we've been sending in I guess first, what made you feel like your Kansas deer was 7? Just the wear of his teeth?
Let me
or
say
was
this
it
about
his
your
body,
Kansas
or-
deer too. This deer was weird looking.
Like really weird.
Just kind of weird looking. You know how some deer, like especially on trail camera, you're just like, I don't know. Like he could be 2 or he could be 6. I'm not sure.
Like I'm not a big like believer in like Roman nose telling age, but this deer had the most defined Roman nose face that I've ever seen on a whitetail buck. Like, I mean, it was the shortest, roundest face I've ever seen.
And the first picture you sent me, granted, this is just pictures.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's definitely a 2-year-old. Like looking at the face.
Yeah.
Face, because you know how them 2-year-olds have like a kind of a short, just a childish looking face kind of. But then you send me a picture of the whole deer, including the head, and I'm like, oh, no, that's a big body deer.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't even get the deer in the truck myself. I had to have you come out and help me get it in.
Yeah, and I'd agree. He's 200 field dressed.
Yeah.
But not overly big pedicles, not a lot of mass, scored 126.
So to your answer of what I thought he was 7 or 8 is I thought he was reverting back in antler quality at that point. Like he scored 126. I had figured he had actually gone downhill in the last 2 years. Okay. And then when I looked at his teeth, then I was like, okay, yeah, he's old.
I would be really, really interested on that because we've been sending in all of our deer for about 10 years now.
Okay.
To Matson's lab.
Yep, Matson's.
So, and then, we send in ours and then a few others. So, give or take, we're sending at least 7 to 10 deer a year.
Nice.
So out of about 100 now, and probably, so I guess 50, probably like, I guess we could really only take ones that we've killed personally that I knew that we had a lot of history with.
Yeah.
I feel as though almost 97% of them have been accurate. There's only been 2 that I feel as though were, there's one deer last year that my dad killed that we called Straight Up, where he literally has the sheds from 1-year-old to 6.5. And that one was dead on. And then the deer I killed that we called Bullwinkle, he came back as 8.5. That one is, I feel like he could have been a little bit older because the first pictures of him, he was definitely, in my opinion, he had to have been 5, which was in 2015. Then I killed him in 2019.
Wow.
If that was the case, he'd have been at least 9. But he came back at 8. Yeah. And then Juice. So this is where I think the 4-year-old theory can get a little interesting because Juice, the reason we call him Juice is because the dude was on roids.
Yeah.
He was humongous. And the pictures, we ended up being able to find him. We have him from what I believe was 2 till when my dad killed him at 5. And that deer by 3 years old, 1, he was 160 some inch 8-point. And 2, I'll bet you he would have dressed 210, 215. Wow. I mean, he's just huge. Yep. And then when my dad killed him, he was 240 pounds dressed and pushing 180. And we thought he was 6. The lab came back at 5. So I think it was accurate just because he was such a genetic freak.
Yeah.
That it appeared as though he was going to be at least 6. But the reason he was so big is because he was just a freak.
Just a freak.
So I don't know. I would love for them to take some high fence deer or something that they know for a fact and let us know because otherwise, from what we've seen, I hear a lot of guys too here in Iowa that talk about they see like another jump from like 7 to 8. So far, if the lab is correct, for us, it seems like 4 years old, 3 to 4 is the biggest jump.
Yep.
5, they're usually pretty close to whatever they were.
Yep.
6 seems to be the biggest. That seems to be the best rack, but it's not usually like another like 25
it's not a
jump.
That's it. Jump. We're passing 5-year-olds now.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
and then 7.
Yeah. Good.
7, it seems that they all start to regress. And they don't lose a lot, but they lose some and they get smaller. If they make it to 8, they seem to lose quite a bit.
I mean, by theory, at least if you look at some of the studies, at 3 years old, a buck accomplishes about 70% of their antler quality. At 4, it's 92. So you're talking about 22% in terms of that jump. By 5, it's 96. By 6, it's 100%. So from 4 to 6, there is not a big jump. You're talking about 8%. Now, I mean, on a 200-inch deer, that's 16 inches, right? But you're still not talking about a giant jump. But that
Which
jump
is pretty significant, though.
Yeah, but a jump from
185 to 200 is.
Let's say it's 130-inch.
Or 165 to 180. That's significant.
130-inch 3-year-old to 4 is going to jump about 28 inches. That's a big jump. That's a big recognition. Going from 130 to basically 160. Yeah. And then you kind of squirrely flatline between 160 and 170. for the next 2 years.
I do think though, like as far as demeanor and like dominance of a buck, I mean, especially if you have an older age class, like there is a big difference between a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old buck. Like haven't seen a handful of 5, 6-year-old deer, not a lot of them, probably not as many as you, Warren, for sure, but out, in the wild as compared to the more 4-year-olds I see, I'm like, he's a little bitch. Like,
yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's been research, not a ton, but I think it's out of Iowa and stuff, some of these places that have better soil quality, that has shown that a deer at 4 may be closer to max antler potential than, previously thought. Meaning, the question becomes, do I pass him at 4 to get him to 5 if he's only going to gain 3%?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say most of the deer that we're seeing at 4, they don't usually do a ton between 4 and 5. But if you could, some of them do 10, 15.
Body wise, I bet they do. I bet they put on body wise, but antler quality probably not.
Antler mass. To behave, mass and trash. It seems like. Yeah. Like I think that the next time that there's if a typical world record is killed again, I think the deer will probably be 4, because I think it'll be before he starts to throw trash and everything. It's just going to be some just super unbelievable genetic freak. But to what Jared was saying, as far as behavior, from what I've seen, it seems like 4-year-olds to me are like, kind of your teenagers, your young 20-year-olds, like they're going to show everybody how tough they are, and they're running around. They got to fight, where your 6-year-olds walk in, and they're just the big badass, and everybody knows it. They don't have to say anything, they don't have to do anything.
Yeah,
exactly. They're much more relaxed with their position than the 4-year-olds seem to be.
Yeah, well, I think those are the same bucks that we talk about in the rut, that like I don't ever see a 6-year-old buck like hardcore chasing. Like I feel like he just calls them and they come.
I never have.
But a 4-year-old I will. Yeah, I think those big, just dominant bucks, just the does just know that they need to find him at some point. Like that's
swing through.
So yeah, that's just it. I don't know.
Tell Warren about Wide Boy.
So this was a buck in Kansas. I started leasing this property in 2014, and I got him on camera. And I remember I was sitting with Winky when I got a cell cam pitch, and I was like, holy shit. I was like, this deer is like ancient, and at that point I figured he was, I don't know, at least 6. Yeah. So that was 2004.
Big old sway back,
yep, 100, mid 150s, probably 10 point. So that was 14. In 15, about the same, just big old sway back, mainframe 10 point.
Looked like he was going downhill at that point.
16 was the year he looked like he went downhill.
Okay.
So 16, he kind of like started to be like, squirrely. Again, thinking 8 years old probably at that point, at least. And so it was like, okay, this deer is probably going to go down. And then in 17, he blows up. He explodes to the point of, we have his shed, this one here. He was low 180s. And that would have been as a 9-year-old, maybe even as a 10-year-old. And I shot him that year in the shoulder blade. So
you didn't kill him?
No, I didn't kill him. I actually found that shed the next fall looking for another guy's buck. But and then obviously because he got shot, like he looked like dog shit the next year, and then I think he died. But I mean, that's a deer that I would feel confident saying at between 9 and 10 probably threw his best rack.
So did you have history with him before that? But that
2014 was the first time I saw him. 2017 is when I shot him with a 180 frame. 2019 he looked like death, and I think that
had
he
to
died.
have been at least 8. At the very least.
Yeah, at least 8. I would assume 9 or 10. Knowing that the deer I killed in 2014 was 8.5.
Yeah.
I would assume
how big was
that was a 175 there. He was 155 in 2014, 180, 182 in 2017 as an 8 or 9.
What was he in 19 when he died?
Oh, like
I think he died
115
because he was injured, so he was way downhill.
Yep. Now that year in between when he decreased, I bet he was in the 140s, maybe 130s, because he had one side that looked normal, the other side was just like laid out trash.
That's whack to me. What would even allow them to do that? I don't
No idea.
like that's so hard for me to understand. That'd be like some 70-year-old dude, laying down
Well,
a bench in a PR.
And
Yeah.
we're what's our degree of confidence it's the same deer?
Very.
Is it 100%?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say so. Yeah.
Because that would be one possible solution.
Because he has the
Different
same
deer.
like characteristics, which was big brow, giant G3, smaller 2, smaller 4. Like, I mean, he's had that his entire life.
Same home range.
Same home range. Had it his entire life.
I'd agree. Same deer.
Now he threw more trash this year, per what you were saying, Warren, about like getting older. He threw more trash this year. He wasn't just clean, but his frame was just, and mass was mega. Like, I don't know. It maybe something happened the year before. He was down to that 130, maybe 140 time frame or inch frame. Like, maybe he just all of a sudden reserved a bunch of energy and a bunch of resources, and then the next year just boom through it. I don't know.
There's no possible way that he was like actually only 3 or something when you first saw him.
I mean, if you saw a picture of this deer, I mean, he was a 240 pound, 250 pound, just
toad,
full mature toad. Yeah.
Huh.
And he rolled the roost.
That's weird.
Yeah, it was just one of those deer that was very odd.
I would guess easy winter. Can we remember? Relatively easy winter, maybe.
Yeah.
Something to do with the access to food source that year.
Well, and I mean, I know
maybe the neighbors started feeding protein pellets.
Maybe the first year that that we had the lease, he had the most competition, and I say that meaning there were 3 other bucks that were 155, 160 mature bucks on that property, including a 170 and a 180 that he would have been competing with. I feel like that would have been the most competition that deer had. After that, he became fairly dominant, the buck in the area. There was one other buck that was maybe somewhat, dominant to him, but, not nearly like he did that first year. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's one of those things you do hear rumors of it where, a deer throws his best frame, late in life like that. But the problem is in free range conditions, like what are the chances of bucks making it to 8 or 9 anyways? It's just not common.
It doesn't happen very often. Yeah.
Not common.
No.
Yeah, most people would kill him and say, yeah, I killed a 5-year-old and it was 8 or 9, or they kill 5-year-olds and they call them 8 or 9. That's probably the more common thing.
Like if we hadn't had that history,
yeah, we would have no idea.
Know. We'd say, I don't know, old.
Yeah, old.
Did you send that one's teeth in?
Didn't have them.
Or never mind, you didn't kill him. That's right.
Yeah, and I don't know where
you shot him in the shoulder.
Yeah,
it was a significant injury too. Like
he didn't like it.
Jeremy walked up on him after, so he had laid down within
40 yards,
and then ended up skirting. I can't believe the deer lived, actually.
Yeah, I thought for sure he was dead. I found it was literally the next November.
I bet you got single lung.
Yeah.
A little bit.
The next November, I was walking through an area that he had bed, and at this point, we didn't know he lived. We thought he died. We had no idea that he made it. And I was walking through, and I looked down this like trail, and I'm like, that's a shed. And, it's November. I was like, damn. I was like, that's a big shed. And I walk up, and I'm like, you've got to be shitting me. It's his shed. He made it through. He lived. And then I think it was later that week we checked a camera, and he was on it, but, I mean, near death. But he had made it a year, and again, that deer was 9 or 10 years old at that point. Natural causes could have killed him just as much as my arrow.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
injuries.
It's
amazing what injuries do to their growth.
Yes.
I've seen a few that get injured, but have you ever seen them rebound from it? It's incredible.
I don't know if I have seen a deer rebound from an injury. I guess I have a few. I definitely have from like a velvet injury. Not from like a bullet, arrow, car injury. Like most of those.
We don't have a whole lot of injuries, but they just get killed.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a deer that got sick. He either got sick or he went blind. We called him Toro.
Uh-huh.
And he was a really nice 8 for most of his life. He's probably 100 and like maybe 145, 150, really wide deer. And then something happened to him where he went blind in his right eye, and he shrunk his beams kind of got short. He had these great big G2s, but just everything else had shrunk. And he was 5 years old, I was pretty sure, and blind. And so he made it through the year. And then the next summer, once, the only injury he had was just being blind in that one eye, he blew up. I mean, just absolutely blew up to probably mid 50s, maybe even 160-inch deer.
Huh.
And so it was pretty crazy to me to see him come back from a injury like that and grow that much. And the deer's still alive. Now I'm going to try and kill him late season. He's like 100.
What injured him the first time, Warren?
I don't know what injured him, but his right eye went blind.
Yeah.
And so it didn't look to me like it was punctured. Like he didn't lose the eye.
Yeah, just
but
it
it
wasn't
blind.
reflective. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Well, and I passed him the one day and I could see him, at 15 yards. It was just this gray dulled over his eye.
Interesting.
And, but had obviously happened in velvet or something. I have no idea what caused it, but he went blind in that eye. And I think that's what made him stunt his growth a little bit. And then after a full year, the next growing season, he grew his best rack ever. So
it's a miracle they don't all go blind. Like when you consider this thing
inches
from
man.
your face, like pretty, at night.
Yeah, especially every time I see on a camera picture like a half rack fighting with a full rack deer, I'm like, you're an idiot. Just stop.
Yeah, dude, these bucks are hard on one another, man. I think they kill each other more than we think.
They just survive. Well, so that's what we talked about that the one day. I think that first of all, from an injury standpoint, one of the biggest things I see them not rebound from is that pedicle injury when they break off a piece of the pedicle when they either shed their antler or whatever. And then two is the amount between that and that fighting back and forth, the amount of bacteria that gets into those cracks and crevices and causes a brain abscess. I think we talked about it at one point in Iowa and Kansas, and then definitely in the deep South, where you get these places where you have a higher population of mature bucks that have more intense fights, basically. You probably have somewhere around a 10% natural mortality rate for brain abscesses. So if you've got 10 5-year-olds on your property, odds are one of them is dying from a brain abscess natural cause type of thing. And it's just because, think about that, you take an antler like this, 2 antlers like that and 2 antlers like that on the other side, and you come as hard as you can and bam. You like that? Hold on to your...
Sorry. I can't.
I don't understand.
Got to hold on to your prostate.
Wide deer.
Huh?
I don't get out the really wide deer. Don't get killed by all the deer that with those narrow tight racks.
Yeah.
Like those stupid 8s. You'd think they would kill them all the time. We did pull apart 2 deer once that had killed the other one. He got his beam shoved up underneath the orbital of this other deer all the way into his brain. Like when we pulled it out, it was like there was probably a good 9-10 inches of antler in this deer's skull. It was unbelievable.
Those 2 that you found locked up.
It's crazy.
Irma and the other buck.
They hadn't been punctured, but there was it was a 3 and a 4-year-old. It was a 4-year-old forkhorn. I don't think he had browns, did he? It was a big forkhorn. Like just the weirdest thing. Pretty heavy,
right.
He's a big body deer.
And he was tied up with a real nice 140-inch 3-year-old.
Yep.
And I didn't recognize the forkhorn. We hadn't really seen him. In hindsight, I'd had one picture of him, and I obviously just skipped right over it. And so Dad still had a tag, so I had him shoot because I knew the 3-year-old. I was like, well, this other deer is bigger bodied than he is, clearly, and they're locked up, and they're not really fighting. They're just standing there. It was pretty late in the game for him, so I had him shoot the bigger bodied deer, and at that point, I was able to chainsaw the one of the 3-year-old's antlers off, and it freed him up.
So they were both alive still before?
Yeah. They were kind of both standing there. I mean, just
prior to Dad putting an arrow through the lungs of the other one.
Yeah. Well, and that thing died within seconds of him shooting it. I mean, it was he just gave it up. Then we freed the one. I was hoping the 3-year-old would live, and he didn't. Unfortunately, he ended up just dying later that night. He couldn't. They'd just been like that too long, probably for a week or so.
Man, that'd be an awful way to go,
isn't it, man? I mean, think about that.
He had a broken jaw for sure.
Just a week of locked up, can't feed, can't do anything. That's miserable.
Yeah,
that's torture. I'd have been thankful for an arrow at that point.
Yeah, I think he probably was.
Yeah, probably.
But yeah, a bummer on in both cases, I guess.
Well, and I would argue that if by some miracle, let's say either Irma lived after you cut that off, or they somehow separated, one of those deer would have probably died from a brain abscess, because I bet there was so much pressure back and forth on that skull plate that you know it was damaged for sure. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt Archery.
Dude, where would we be without our Hoyt bows?
Probably shooting crossbows.
or a Matthews, yeah.
One and the same.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, we love being Hoyt guys because you stand out. When you're in this room full of other people that shoot these other types of bows, I feel like the Hoyt guys just stick out.
Dude, it's just a legit bow. I mean, especially that carbon riser, man. I mean, I know that they've got several other aluminum lines as well, but for me, I'm shooting that RX5 in the carbon model. They've since come out with the RX7, and I can't tell you how much I love being a Hoyt guy amongst a sea full of Matthews guys. So we're out there, I think, proving them wrong, shooting 80 pounds and killing stuff.
Hey, man, if you want to get serious, get Hoyt.
So Warren, what are you doing now, man?
Either.
What are you doing like with we talked to your dad obviously earlier in the year.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
are you still like, what are you doing for work? Are you full-time raised hunting? Are you working?
Have you seen our social media stuff?
Yes.
There's no way Dad's doing that.
No, well, we knew that.
All right.
Yeah, I'm doing race hunting stuff full time.
Easton's back in the fold too, right?
He is. So we're actually got a lot of cool stuff in the works. The digital, Dad does a great job on telling stories and sharing the meaning of hunting. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok isn't necessarily his strength.
Yeah. Dude, I've seen a lot of like you guys have the podcast, which I've seen lots of clips. Is that on TikTok that I'm seeing that?
Yeah, TikTok, Instagram, we put them out there on all of our platforms just when we're promoting, the new episodes, which that's actually been a lot of fun.
Yes.
Doing podcasts like this.
Yeah.
It is fun. It's like, hey, trying to come up with a way to get paid to talk. That's even better than working.
Yeah. Which is my wife would say is perfect for Jeremy.
Yeah, I like it. I like
a bunch of yappers.
Yeah.
So, what's your format for that? Are you guys sitting down once a week? More than that? Is it just always you, Easton, and Dad?
Yeah, so right now we've been doing once a week. Really, we just kind of started doing it more just for something fun to do because we felt as though it'd be kind of cool between, having a dad and two sons and just talk about our stuff. And then really people have really enjoyed it. So they made us stick to it. So we do once a week, and then we'll usually take like one topic and we'll cover that topic. And then now most of the time people just send us in what they want us to cover, what we go over. So we'll do a lot of stuff that's controversial sometimes.
No.
Such as
the arrow debate is the very first one that we launched into. So I know you guys have done that.
Yeah.
So we've played into some of the arrow stuff because I did the whole heavy arrow thing for a while. And
are you not still?
No.
What have you what has been your transition there?
So when I say I jumped into it, I would say that was like probably 3-4 years ago. I was
same times the traps developed.
I think it was, I was shooting like 570 grain arrows or something like that. I'd made these fairly heavy arrows. I was going elk hunting, and
I'd say that's fairly heavy.
I was pulling 67, I think. I was still shooting expandable. Never killed any of my elk.
That must have been way before the traps came in.
67 pounds.
I can tell you can kill elk with expandables. I know people don't believe it.
I killed one this year.
Yeah.
I probably won't do it again. But yeah.
Well, we shot probably 25 or so elk now with expandables. And so the issue that I had with it is, especially elk hunting, I had to be so dead on my ranges in order to be able to hit where I needed to, that it wasn't worth the trade-off for me. So I had an elk at 43 that I missed, and then really hadn't paid enough attention to my setup. Then when I went and shot my bow at 40, I was like, there's no way that my bow must got bumped. Shot at 40 dead on. Then I stepped back to 43, put my 40 right on, and I had friggin' 6-7 inches of drop. And so after that, I was like, okay, I don't want to go like
you're
super
shooting
light.
67 pounds.
I know, right? Before the traps. So, but so after that, I went to I'm shooting like 430 grain arrows. I shot through my bull last year, which was kind of funny because a lot of the guys, I was with a recurve guy, so he was like, you can't shoot an elk with an expandable and all this. And I shot my bull at 25 yards, clean pass through, 430 grain arrow, 70 pounds. And my draw length's not super long, 28. So for me, a lot of it was the range. I didn't want to have to be worrying about 2 or 3 yards on elk.
Just double lung, like.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, right behind the shoulder. I went through one rib on the offside, but the thing with elk too, they're so big, and the thing that I'm really privileged with is my dad is such a good caller that he's really good at putting them right where we need to.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about taking a 1/4-2 shot or a frontal shot because I know he's going to bring them past me, and I'm going to have a broadside shot or a 1/4 away shot, whatever I need, to be able to get in there. So that's what we've been shooting, or I've been shooting all of our elk with. So we'll go over stuff like that where, we're not telling anybody that they're wrong, and we're not telling anybody, hey, you got to do it our way, you got to do it this way. All we're doing is saying, this is our experience. Okay. So here we've got, 200 kills on film or whatever. These are the ones that we think that it was the broadhead's fault, which is very rarely the case. I think a lot of times we're just trying to blame that on something.
Sure.
And we're just giving people our experience, so it's not us consulting them or trying to tell them, you need to do this, you need to do that. But however, though, we're not going to go tell people, hey, you have to go and shoot a 600 grain arrow to kill an elk.
Right.
We've killed 20 elk.
600 is pretty extreme too. So I'm shooting 475.
Yep.
So, and I would call that a heavier. I've backed it down. So the heaviest I went was like 500.
515?
Yeah, so that's not that much, though.
475. Yeah.
But I know you guys know there's some guys out there telling you that that's way too light still.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, we've had the conversations with them.
Yeah, dude, it's a weird like underworld of guys.
They also don't want us to shoot expandables, which we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Expandables, I think that personally, so Iowa legalized tracking dogs last year.
Yep.
Right. And this, you guys probably get all kinds of hate over this, but I believe that we had more deer that we were losing that were fixed blades than expandables.
Yeah, because there's no blood trail.
Yeah. I mean, even good shots.
Yeah, no
like
blood
the blood trails weren't. Yeah, I was like, there was one this person shot with just a fixed blade. It was Muzzy, something like that. Just your typical 3-blade fixed blade. And they were like, I think I hit it pretty good. And then I get there and I'm like, oh God, here we go, because it's another one of these where there's like no blood, and I was like, it's going to be one of these deals where we're going to have this little tiny blood trail in this deer. They probably accidentally they thought they hit it good, but they really hit it in the leg or whatever else. Well, sure as shit, we tracked this deer like 120 yards, and there it is, and it was good shot. Like
no blood,
hardly any blood. I mean, like there was blood, but compared to what I'm seeing with a big freaking 2-blade that goes through there, I'm like, what the, and then the cut's just like that big, and I'm like, yeah, man, I don't.
You can't find them if you can't find blood. I mean, that's a fact.
For the record, we feel the same way. We're both shooting expandable broadheads.
Yep.
My arrow's 475. Yours is probably
450. Mm-hmm.
I'm shooting 80 pounds. Jeremy's shooting 70, and they're perfect for whitetail. Like I think there's very few shots that we wouldn't take. Like
I shot. I'm
like, what shoulder?
I shot that Kansas buck 1/4-2 this year and buried half plus an arrow in double lung. You want 20 yards.
Yeah,
just right through shoulder. I didn't even hesitate.
But I shot an elk this year 1/4-2 me in the shoulder, and pretty impressive. Still got through it, but I got single lung. And
elk, dude, are a different species, man. Those frickers are tough. And they're huge.
And so I think to do it again, because like those guys are right. The fixed blade guys are when they say you want to plan for worst case scenario. Where I think they miss it is there's a much greater chance you're going to hit soft tissue.
Sure.
Than a bone that's going to stop the arrow. In my opinion, if you're shooting enough weight and a heavy enough arrow, I think. Go ahead.
Did you shoot your elk by yourself, or was somebody calling for you, or what?
Somebody's
calling for me.
So was Jeremy calling for you?
No. It was a friend we have out in Colorado.
Well, you need to train him. You need a better caller, and I'm willing to go on record. Anybody can light me up if they want to. You get the right setups, and you don't need to take 1/4-2 shots. We have 20 plus bulls I can show you if you do the right setups and you set up in the right scenario, and you won't have to worry about a 1/4-2 shot. Yeah. But now I'll tell you, my dad's an elk wizard. The dude, I tell him all the time, it's a shame.
Is he
I feel
from Harry
bad for you
Potter?
because he's way better at killing elk than he is deer. So he's really good with elk, and he understands what they're going to do, and he get in the right setups. And I don't think that you need to take them. The freaking shoulders on elk are just so solid.
So back to the podcast. You guys are doing it once a week, and you guys are basically like covering a topic per podcast.
Yeah, covering a topic per podcast. And it just has different iterations of what we do. Like we said, sometimes it's controversial stuff. Sometimes it's really, that's kind of what started. Is we just felt as though there was, for instance, like the heavy arrow thing. From what we could see, it was like if I was a hunter out east and I wanted to go out elk hunting, I would feel like I had to shoot a 650 grain arrow with a fixed blade broadhead, and I have to do this and I have to do that. And we just want to share experiences with people that, hey, you don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. We've had success doing other things. And so that was where it started. And then now most of our topics come from, the public. Whatever they ask us to do, we usually cover a lot of different stuff. So the last few weeks, there's been a lot of whitetail strategies, things like that. We've talked about cell cams. I know you guys have talked about cell cams too.
Yeah.
I think cell cams are super. I think you can actually learn a lot from your cell cams, but I think too, they can give you a big advantage. Yeah.
Huge.
Humongous advantage for sure. I think that I'll be curious to see how much further it goes. I think all of it, the technology, all of it, it's like how much farther is this all going to go?
Who's going to put a stop to it?
I don't know that they will. I think that your states would have to, and that's going to be a really hard thing for them to be able to legislate on a lot of it. So,
it'd be a really easy thing to legislate. It's just would they do it or not?
Yeah,
because of the hunters that it brings in, and because of the that money that it sustains.
Well, I mean, if you look at obviously we talk specifically cell cams, but look at trail cams in general. You've got several Western states banning trail cameras. You've got a state like Missouri where it's technically illegal to use any trail camera on public land, state-owned public land. So, I mean, there's definitely legislation and rules that are going to limit those things. Again, I don't think that it'll probably. I don't know if cell cameras necessarily are going to be on that docket as much as baiting.
Rightfully so.
Yep. And then I would assume the continued evolution of weapons, like we talked about with Jared Mills this morning. Back in the day, using a muzzleloader in Iowa was fine because it was 100 yards. Now they're shooting 800 yards with a precision muzzleloader. That's a whole different ballgame,
Yeah, there's
so
definitely iterations to that.
Same with straight-walled rifle cartridges. Mm-hmm. Obviously that's been a new thing in Ohio. I think that's a newer thing in Iowa as well. We've become more efficient at killing, yet the regulations haven't adapted to that. So I don't know what you do. Somebody has to make a choice. Somebody has to step up and say something. Because otherwise, if we become more efficient at killing, we're harvesting a limited resource. It's not necessarily a point of no return, but at some point we will damage that resource, which is going to affect the satisfaction of all the hunters who are pursuing it.
Well, I think that's one of those things that once that stuff happens, it's a lot harder to put the genie back in the bottle.
Oh, no doubt, man.
Absolutely. So I think as soon as you open up the ability to have straight wall cartridges, and the chances that that's going to just stop right there is, in my opinion, close to none. Sure. And then you're obviously anybody that goes against any of that is going to be attacked. I think the number one thing you hear now is that hunters all need to stick together. That's like the argument for everything, which I agree with, but that doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be regulations and certain things in place.
It's kind of a cop-out. We see that a lot.
People are disagreements.
People are like, can't we just all get along? Like,
no.
Can't we just all support each other? It's like,
no.
Right.
No.
Yeah,
we can't.
But there still has to be parameters. Sure. This isn't just we're all going to just jump around in a circle and sing happy songs. Like, there's got to be certain things. Otherwise, there is no point in a bow season. If you have gun seasons, there's no point and you're allowing gun seasons during your bow seasons. There's no point in a lot of those different regulations if you're making all of it into one thing. So I think that just saying.
Well, no, I agree. I think the other big thing, and we've brought it up in the past, and it's not because like we're saying like, no more hunters or whatever, but especially in 2020 and 21, grew rapidly, call it overnight, in terms of hunter numbers because of COVID. And we push those people into a limited resource, which would be the access standpoint, whether it's public land or private lands that were open. And at the same time, we're becoming more efficient at killing because of bait piles, cellular cameras, crossbows, long-range muzzleloaders, whatever. Doesn't matter. Put them all in the mix. So, and still, during that massive uptick, of which, if anything, the states have been trying to counter how to kill more deer because our hunter numbers are decreasing. Now in 2 years, we have this huge uptick. Did they change season dates? Did they change bag limits? No, none of that changed.
Do you think those hunters will stay?
Not all of them. I do think that we are still way above where we were in 2019.
Oh yeah.
By
probably,
I would assume it's at least 7% right now, if not more.
Well, it's an interesting question. You say, will they stay? If, like in the state of Ohio, and I'm sorry for pounding this into the ground, if stay means one day out of the year, go out and dump 500 pounds of corn and sit 100 yards away from it with a rifle with a cell camera on it.
Yes.
Sure. I'll do that 1 or 2 days a year.
Yes. A lot of people will.
Yeah, I think if you define it as will they continually buy a license? What retention rate are you going to see there?
In Ohio, if you don't have to buy a license as a landowner.
Yeah, except unless you actually don't either if you're a non-resident, unless the state doesn't reciprocate.
Which
mine doesn't. So.
Or a son or daughter.
Yeah, correct. The whole family. I have to because Pennsylvania doesn't reciprocate.
Right. I do too because.
Yeah, dumb.
Why do you?
Why?
Because
why would they not make them buy a license?
Because as a landowner, you don't have to.
Yeah.
That's a policy of the state.
Do they have to buy a tag?
No. Mm-mm. Nothing.
So they can just shoot whatever?
Yeah. During the season within the bounds of the bag limits on your land.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I'm saying is like there's a lot of things that have not changed. We tried to put a thumb down on it for crossbows and corn in Ohio, and I don't think we ever I don't know how long. They may have always been legal. I don't know. We know in Kansas, crossbows became completely legal in 2013, so not that long ago. And if you talk to any resident of Kansas, they will tell you that the quality of deer has decreased since then. And I'm not picking on crossbows. I'm just picking on the fact that by adding something like crossbows into a season, you instantly attract more people wanting to hunt the archery season in Kansas than you did when no crossbows were there, right? I mean, it's a fact.
The Kansas draw odds, too, would reflect that, right?
Yeah, well, I mean,
for sure.
Yeah, it was 100%. I mean, I never even blinked. In fact, there were a leftover license after the draw. Now, it's probably in every other year, maybe back-to-backs if you get lucky.
Not just the odds, but the number of applicants themselves.
Substantial.
It's crazy.
Substantial.
Right.
Yep.
So then I guess that would leave there could only have been two things that caused that. Either one, the legalization of crossbows, or two, the COVID spike.
Yeah.
Those would be the only two things that could do that.
And I think it was probably both. I think there were a lot of people who probably were not hunters and or were, call it dormant hunters, right, who were reactivated by saying, well, I got all this time, and now I can use a crossbow. Yeah, I'll go hunt bow season.
Right. It was both.
And I'm not saying that, again, I'm not picking on the fact of but what I would like to know now, how has that, over the last 3 years, especially 2020, 21, and 22, affected deer numbers, harvest numbers, and like population estimates? The one thing that most of these states do terrible jobs at, and it's because of lack of resources, is tell me how many deer I have in an area. I have no freaking idea. Pennsylvania still throws a hula hoop in the woods to see what kind of browse is there, and they're like, yep, we need to take more deer out. What? I'm serious. That's how they do it. It's just that's their methodology for doing it. Other ones have this crazy scientific calculation. We talked to Chad at Michigan. Remember, it was months after the season he finally got the harvest date out, and he's like, but they already had said how many they should shoot the next year before they even had the number. It's like, how do you do that?
Yeah, that wouldn't work.
Every state does it different.
In Montana, when we lived in Montana still, the whole grizzly bear situation.
Yeah.
The way they got their counts on the grizzlies was from a chopper. And if you've ever been to the northwest corner of Montana, there is so much stuff that you can't see into. There's no way that you are ever getting an accurate count. So their answer to that was like, well, yeah, they're like, well, we'll fly like 3 times and we'll get a count. And then we'll just assume that we're missing like 10%. And I'm like, you guys can see like 3% of what is there. Your number, you need to multiply it by like 50 at least. And so they're saying, that there's like 600 grizzly bears in all of Montana back then or something like that. And I'm like,
which was dramatically underestimated, right?
Oh God, not even close. Way more.
Yeah, and I mean that's where we've gotten answers like, well, we're going to do a 3-year study and then we'll let you know. Well, let's just hypothetically say that the increase in hunters from COVID, plus in Pennsylvania's case, opening Sunday hunting, plus, more efficient weapons at killing, all of a sudden has a dramatic increase on the success rate.
Plus cell cams.
Yeah, plus cell cams, plus the number of increased hunters. Do we really want to wait 3 years before we realize, oh shit, we're killing way too many deer? That's crazy.
Yeah, I would. The only thing I would give them to that it'd be really hard to be getting all that stuff planned out and ready in time.
Yep.
If their information takes that long to be able to receive it in the first place.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Stealth Cam.
Dude, where would we be without our cell cams?
I would definitely be divorced at this point.
Yeah, I hear that.
I mean, the fact is I spent more time checking cameras than I actually did hunting prior to cell cameras. Now, at least, my wife can enjoy me being in the comfort of my own home, buried in my phone, checking those pictures.
Yeah, 100%. And dude, when it comes to trail cameras and definitely cell cameras, reliability is, I think, the number one thing that we're looking for. Stealth Cam just has a long reputation of reliable cameras, and ultimately that is the most important thing to us. They have to work.
In terms of reliability, there's not a better camera on the market than Stealth Cam, whether you're talking about the Fusion X, the Reactor, or the DS4K Transmit. And most of them are under $200.
Stealthcam.com. Check them out.
And I think the biggest thing that kind of eats at me, and I'm sure a lot of people, is I just want the states to communicate. I just want them to talk to us. I want them to be open about data. I want them to be open about what's happening. I just want them to talk to us. And I feel like they're behind a locked door, like the government, like the White House, and I don't know what's going on in there. And it's my money fueling them, and I don't know what's going on.
I think if you wanted that, you'd have to go and show them. I don't know that they even keep that information from us, like intentionally, as much as they, like most of your DNRs, in my opinion, are pretty old school still, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the people in them are pretty old school. I don't think that they're using digital media and social media and these ways in a facet that they could actually be able to communicate with us, nor do they even probably know that we want that information. They may be thinking, nobody cares about the harvest report. Nobody cares about that stuff. Where I think that for them to put that information on social media, to us, it's like, hey, that'd be a
it'd be awesome to look at.
Thing. And they probably have never even thought of that.
They've seen this podcast.
Yeah.
And I know they know that we want it.
Yeah. Well, right? And I mean, I absolutely, as a professional, understand the fear, which is I put something out there and it goes on fire because people make inferences that are incorrect.
Information is power, and a lot of us, can't handle it.
I get it. But that said, like, that's fine. Give it with a grain of salt and black out the confidential stuff. I don't care, but there are some base numbers that should be. And the fact is if archery harvest in a state like Pennsylvania or Illinois or wherever or Kansas have increased dramatically since the installment of crossbows, that's a fact. Don't hide it. Just, okay, it's a fact. Now, what do we do about it? Do we need to change the season? Do we need to limit the amount of people? Do we need to manipulate the season length? Like, I don't know, but at least here's what's happened. Now, what do we do with it? Instead, it's like Pandora's box. Nobody knows. And so we're all, if anything, maybe I'm making a bigger deal out of it than it should be, but it's because I don't know. And the data doesn't exist out there for me to know and to say it.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting because, too, that's not on a national level. It would be a state-by-state
basis. Yeah. In fact, I think some states I know he gets a lot of shit for it, but Chad Stewart in Michigan has his own Facebook page as the head deer and elk biologist in the state of Michigan, of which he posts all the time, like real check-in data. Hey, we're at the check stations today on opening day. Here's how many bucks were checked in. Here's how many does were checked in. Here's this. And like, I mean, it's wide open to the public. People write to him. He writes back. And I know he takes a lot of abuse on that. But that's some open communication. And you know what? I respect him way more for that than somebody that, you know, is managing my resource and I've never even heard from in 5 years.
Yeah, I think you guys have people here. We're kind of like, we have big deer, so we're all just kind of happy about it.
I know, we all hate you.
I could imagine that.
I kind of told Jared Mills this morning. I was like, yeah, you guys think like, he's like, I mean, it's Iowa. He's like, what do you say? Deer in Iowa aren't that much different from deer in Pennsylvania. I'm like, right.
Warren should come hunt Pennsylvania with us. He'd love it out here.
Yeah, come on out, bud. We'll trade. We'll swap.
Hunt swap.
You know, I'd consider it. I think I'd have a little fun with it.
You would have fun.
I could,
but then you would be like, okay, I'm ready to go back.
I'm ready to see deer again.
Yeah.
That's probably why, because I could go and shoot a 100-inch deer or whatever and be stoked, and then go home and hunt, you know, some big deer.
That's right.
So
yeah, you're like, okay, this is fun.
Exactly.
I think
this has been fun, guys, but okay.
Yep. But if you had those things that you were running into, I think you'd be a lot more concerned with it. I think if I was in your position, I'd probably be a lot more concerned on what is my state doing, what are we trying to do to make this better, and how do we make sure this doesn't continue to happen.
Yeah.
Where I think when you might kind of have the blindfolds on when you're in my position, where it's like, oh man, I only had a few booners to chase this year.
I was going to say, to your point, if that legislation dropped that allowed non-residents to get a landowner tag by buying property, I guarantee you take more of an interest in it right away.
Oh, yeah, there would have been a problem, not just from me, but from the state as a whole. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think a lot of that, because there's always stuff that comes up every year. You know, they've been putting in the straight wall cartridge for years. Yeah. But there's just certain legislation that like the entire state as a whole completely agrees on. Like you'd find very few people in the state of Iowa that would want non-residents to be able to buy X amount of ground and get taxed. Yeah. Like that's one of the few things that almost anybody in the state would completely agree on.
Crazier things have happened though, dude.
I know.
Joe Biden is our president. Think about that for a minute. You think they won't let landowners hunt in Iowa?
They got to figure out how to rig it first.
Yeah. Should be pretty easy.
Probably going to write Uncle Joe a message and be like, listen, as a non-resident of Iowa, I really think you should push for the legalization of me buying land and getting a tag. He'll be like,
it's already done. We spent billions of trillions of dollars.
Consider it signed.
Is that a yes?
Yeah. Well, everybody can check out Warren, David, and Easton's podcast. Is it on your YouTube and social? YouTube as well?
Yep, everywhere you get podcasts, Raised Hunting Podcast, you know, Spotify, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, all that good stuff.
Perfect, man. Well, cool, dude. Well, we appreciate you coming on, and thanks for stealing an afternoon with us, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man.
It's fun.
Perfect, man. Obviously a lot of different topics, and Warren and I kind of talked about that.
What a stud muffin. First of all, freaking boy is built.
He's built, dude. Oh, yeah, I just put up 405. What?
Yeah, he's like, I'm not sure exactly, but it's somewhere around 500 pounds.
Yeah. I bet that dude's like, you two, like, I couldn't afford to take you two out to dinner. Actually, I did. I took Warren and Karen out to a SHOT Show buffet one time. Yeah. That boy about closed that shit down.
Yeah.
At one point, I think Karen looked at him and said, stop.
That's enough.
Stop.
Let me get some of that there yeller. Some of that yeller stuff and some of the purple.
Yeah. But it's funny because Warren and I have shot back and forth messages knowing like he touches base on the Raised Hunting Podcast, a lot of the things we talk about here, you know, with crossbows and state stuff and public land, private land, you know, and again, it's not to push buttons necessarily as much as it is to get those discussions going and to have those conversations.
It's a real conversation. Yeah, I got to give them credit. I mean, dude, I think of all the podcasts I've seen, like theirs is comparable to ours in terms of format. Yeah,
and it's cool, obviously, because, you know, David's coming from that old school mentality, and then you've got Warren and Easton kind of in that new school thought process. And, I think that they've done a really good job. I mean, they're one of those podcasts that we, you know, continue to see out there as like performing and doing well. But Warren also, you know, it's funny because he definitely thinks like we do in terms of hunting and the passion for it. It's just, you know, and even Mills is the same way. It's like, man, it's no offense to those guys, but they're just in Iowa.
You can't possibly get it. Just
nor can I. Like, I don't know what they're doing and experiencing. I just look at it in awe from the outside.
We have a little bit of perspective, having gone to some Midwestern
like Kansas and
there
stuff.
There are some guys, I would say, just like the guys in Iowa can't possibly perceive like how bad it can be. Frankly, guys out here in some of the eastern, public lands states in the Northeast and stuff. If you haven't been out there, can't possibly perceive what it's like to have, as Warren said, at least 2 booners on every 400 acres. Imagine if in Pennsylvania there's at least 2 booners on every 400 acres.
Dude, that's so crazy. I don't remember who I was having the discussion with the other day. We were talking about land and stuff, and you and I have had the discussion several times in probably the last few weeks where we just want to be in the game, right? I mean, ultimately, yeah, it'd be awesome to kill a booner every year. But if I'm in the game, it was Skalma who I was talking to. Yeah. I was like, I just need to know I'm hunting a buck that gets me worked up, like gets me excited, gets me out there knowing I'm in the game. If I kill him, amazing. Odds are I won't, but I love being in the game. What's disappointing is never even getting to the big show because I'm trying so hard to make something happen, and no disrespect to the deer, they're not there. Yeah. They don't get to be that caliber of deer to get you excited. That doesn't mean I don't want to go out and hunt a mature buck and kill a mature buck, but it's disheartening if the best deer on your property is maybe a 134-year-old.
Right.
And people are going to say, oh, here he is complaining again. But it's just because look at what these deer could be.
Yeah, man.
That 134-year-old could be a 150 or 165-year-old.
All deer can be that. The deer in Iowa aren't giants because they're in Iowa. The deer in Iowa are giants because they're old.
That's it.
And
same in Kansas.
And yes, you can say something about the habitat quality, but all that stuff ultimately fuels age. Like they can get food just about anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to have 115-inch 6-year-olds in Iowa just like you are in Pennsylvania. The reality is those deer that are amazing quality 180s and 190s at 5 and 6 in Iowa die at 2 and 3 in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
That's the reality. And very few, the one out of, a million make it in Pennsylvania, and somebody kills them at 100. There was one in Beaver County. I saw the other 194, 28-inch beams, 14.5-inch twos, a mega giant. It can happen, but they just don't get there.
And almost surely not older than 4 years old, probably.
Yeah, I think that deer was 5.
Yeah.
He made it.
Yeah.
He made it there, and he expressed a massive set of antlers.
That's all it takes.
They just can't do it most of the time in these states. And again, push the panic button. People are seeing that happen a little bit in Ohio, for sure in Kansas, like definitely in Illinois. I'm not saying that those states aren't going to produce giants, but ultimately those states will see less giant old bucks because of the pressure that's happening and the opportunities that are happening in those states from a hunting standpoint. Mm-hmm. It's just a fact. So,
yeah. Well, dude, take it from guys that are older than us. Like in the state of Ohio, Rising is one of the guys that has been killing giants for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how old Ben is. Late
40s,
mid-late 40s. And so he's seen a lot more of this progression than we have. And I mean, I sense,
what do you say? 12 years.
I sense from him that he's pretty discouraged with
12 years since he's seen a 200 in Ohio.
Yeah,
and I mean, he's in them. He's
best
managing.
Place he could be.
Yeah. 12 years. And struggling consistently to kill, I'd say 150 to 160 class deer in Ohio now.
Yeah. And so the dude knows what it takes to, genetically at least for a deer to like get big. And when you ask him how many potential, future big deer do you have, he just rolls his eyes because it's like all of them.
Mm-hmm.
All of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough thing. And again, that's not to say, hey, don't shoot 130-inch 3-year-old or 100-inch 2-year-old. Like, shoot whatever makes you happy. Understand that every trigger pull that you make has an implication. I think that's the best way to say it is you know, it's great if you want to say you hunt like you hunt, I hunt like I hunt. Can't happen. It's a shared resource. So understand that when you pull a trigger, that decision as my neighbor will affect me. And you can be happy and maybe I'm disappointed, and I'm not saying that should rub off on you, but just understand that I may not be happy that you did that. And especially if you continue to do that over and over and over again, when the reason I'm disappointed is they could be bigger. They could be greater deer. You just aren't going to understand where I'm coming from, and I won't understand where you're coming from. And that is deer hunting. That is deer management. It's not easy. But you just have to understand that every trigger pull has an implication on yourself and someone else.
Yeah. I think you and I just want people to appreciate deer.
Yes.
Be considerate. I mean, it's just such a dynamic thing that we're talking about. Be considerate to people on public land, but we just want people to appreciate the resource, appreciate whitetail deer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think inherently, when you do that, it's natural to want to see them in their ultimate form.
Again, everybody, I don't care who you are, if you shoot the first buck you see or the first button buck you see, everybody daydreams of a giant buck. You can't tell me that you don't. If you do, you're lying to yourself. Everybody daydream. Everybody sits in a stand or on a log or on a tree or on a bucket. And
most people, for sure.
They daydream of a big buck coming in because it's just, that is the thing. And 99% of us will never experience what we're dreaming of there. But the fact that it could be possible is what keeps those hopes alive.
Mm-hmm.
You never sit down. Nobody ever sits down and dreams of a button buck coming over a hill.
You know what, though? It is possible for a lot more people than it's happening to now, in my opinion, with the correct management.
Absolutely. Correct mindset. You have to be willing to end the season with that tag sitting in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think many
that
are.
is the question, is like, if you knew, because it's the not knowing that keeps people from making the decision to hold off. If you knew that once every 3 years you could shoot a 150 or better, or every year you can shoot 120, what would you choose?
I mean, I would try to be killing a 150.
Or maybe it's a greater difference. Maybe it's every 3 years you could kill a 160.
But I mean,
I'm just making these numbers up.
Yeah, there's plenty of people listening to this right now that'll say, I don't care about score. Score is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my life.
Then shoot a doe.
Would I want to kill a buck?
Why? For what?
I don't think most can answer that. It's my right. It's my privilege.
It is.
That's hunting to me. I kill bucks.
Okay. I mean, I just think that's it's a pretty shallow approach. Like, if your goal is just to kill a buck every year, I would say that's not hard. I think anybody can do that.
Which is where I guess we have a tough time, and I think a lot of people have a tough time in a mindset to say, well, why don't you want to do better? That's like saying,
right.
Every day I'm going to go to my job at 8 o'clock and I'm going to check out at 4. And as long as I check my boxes, I don't care. I get a paycheck. I get it done. Like, don't you ever want to be better at that? And there will be people listening to this that say, no, it's work. That's an awful mindset.
Mm-hmm.
It's miserable.
Yeah.
Miserable mindset. Like, do you not want to be a better father or mother? Do you not want to be a better husband or wife? If the answer is no, what are you doing with your life? Seriously, like, why? What do you mean you don't want to be better? We are programmed as humans to be better, to want to be better, to want to grow, to want to be knowledgeable, to want to be healthy, to want to be successful. That's how we're bred, to want to be happy.
Are we, though? Are we programmed that way, or are we programmed to want to be comfortable and be guaranteed the 120 every year?
Ugh.
Is it just a select few of us that want to break out and want to kill the 160 every 3 years?
I would hope that there's more people out there listening to this that want to be better.
We're humans. We're not robots. We're not programmed.
I will say that I had
you can be, not what you want to be.
For a long time, I had a hard time not filling a tag. My goal every year was to fill my buck tag. Mm-hmm. That's what it was for a long time. And then I killed a bunch of bucks. And then I was like, well, I don't want to kill that 5-point. I'd rather kill a bigger 8-point or whatever, right? I'm looking, and inevitably I ate my tag many years because I didn't shoot that buck. I waited for this buck. He never showed or didn't even exist at that time. Who knows? So you ate your tag and maybe you shot a doe.
It's a metaphor.
Yeah. Literally, probably sometimes. So you shot a doe or you didn't shoot anything. There were I remember the first year, I think I was like 27 or something. The first year, I didn't kill a deer. Up until from 12 to 27, I had killed at least a deer, doe, whatever, every year until I was like 27. I lived in Kentucky and I did not kill a deer that year. I passed a bunch of small bucks and it was like I almost freaked myself out. Like, what are you doing? Are you losing your touch? Like, why didn't you kill a deer? And it was just because of my choices. I could have killed deer, could have killed plenty of small bucks. I just chose not to.
Yeah.
And then that broke the ice to say, well, it wasn't a big deal.
Let me ask you this. If what do you think would be the implications of a state agency rather than saying, point restriction, antler restriction, only deer, pick a number, 2.5 or older, may be harvested?
The problem is we do not have a definitive method of aging of free-ranging deer.
Okay.
So it's a variable accuracy.
Yeah.
Per what we just talked about with
that's the reason the antler restriction is the way we do it.
It's definitive.
It's hard to do.
A point or not. An inch on the beam or not an inch on the beam. I mean, that's the next step.
Why not? What about if you give a year of leniency? Say only 3-year-old deer can be shot plus or minus 1.
Sure.
Or just minus 1.
Sure. I mean, you could do that.
Otherwise, it's a fine.
I would assume most people would stop hunting.
You think most people would stop hunting?
They would just poach, and then you'd have to enforce and fine them. Because they wouldn't do it. I mean, half these guys can barely tell if it's a buck or a doe, let alone a 3-year-old. Seriously.
So maybe it's for the best. If that's the case.
Here's the problem. At some point, you need a certain amount of hunters to keep the herd under control.
Agreed.
That is the issue.
Yep.
That's the fear, right? The reason that the recruitment, retention, reactivation was so pushed is the fear was, what if we drop below too low to where we can't manage the herd, and all of a sudden the general public says they can't do their job, so why are they even allowed to hunt?
Mm-hmm.
That was the fear, and still is the fear, I think, in some cases. But so you can't put the barrier to entry so great that it detriments that, because then it's like, obviously you and I can go kill a bunch of does. I don't want to.
Can't the earn a doe thing fix that? Earn a buck fix that?
Yeah, but I mean, to a certain level. But it's like, do I, like some of these Wisconsin guys, they're like, man, I don't really want to have to go shoot 3 does to get my buck tags. Like, that's a pain in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
You and I would probably say the same thing. Like, my kids, my wife would love to shoot it. I'll shoot a couple does. I don't want to have to shoot and process 3 does just before I can hunt a buck.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's just that barrier to entry and the fact that it is a privilege, right? And in some states, it's now a legislation privilege, like actually is built into the state constitution. So, I mean, taking that away, I don't think is the answer. Frankly, I think simple things like removal baiting or limitation of weapons and in their effectiveness.
Sure. Make it more difficult.
Will get to the goal that we're trying to achieve on a grander scale.
I agree.
And the person who wants to go out and shoot, half rack 3-point can go do it.
By all means.
They just can't do it on a corn pile or with a gun or with a crossbow through the whole archery.
Some combination.
Some sort of
method. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I agree.
So that way you keep everybody who wants to hunt. You don't want to deter the person who is brand new to hunting to not be able to kill anything. You want them to get that bug, that hook, that understanding.
I did think it's worth mentioning too, because I caught myself almost wanting to blurt out like, why don't we all just do it like Iowa does it? Because imagine if Pennsylvania let their landowners kill 3 deer.
Oh my God.
We obviously couldn't handle it.
Yeah, and I mean, even if we banned our non-residents, it's a fraction of the hunters in the state.
Right. Yeah.
Fraction. Same with Ohio, fraction of the hunters in the state. Yeah, so it's just every state has to manage differently. I just think that there could probably be better input or communication of how they're doing it and why they're doing it.
Yeah, you said that.
Okay. We'll end it with that. We appreciate Warren coming on, and we'll see you next week.
Later.
Take me